Mr. Robert Scott. He's the former state school superintendent for the state of Texas. When the Common Core curriculum came out, he evaluated that program and determined that it was best that the state of Texas not enter into that and become a part of that. There are a lot of concerns with that and a lot of implications for the state, both from a financial standpoint and from the ability to retain our state and local control over education. And I don't want to take any of his time away, but if you'd come on, Mr. Scott.
Let me say this in the interim. I felt that we needed to have someone of the knowledge Dr. Scott address this and the experience that they had in the state of Texas. I think the two big issues that face us in Common Core is number one, the financial piece of it, what it costs to be, the curriculum that we will be able to adopt or not adopt, and also the financial piece will affect the testing and the instruments that come out of it. Dr. Scott, we're glad to have you with us today, and I understand you've got to catch a plane.
Yes, sir.
And so this segment will last until 2:30 or until you decide to quit.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman and members, thank you so much. And I want to thank Senator Leon for asking me to be here. And to everybody that I have met with over the past 48 hours, I really do want to extend my appreciative thanks for the graciousness and kindness that has been shown to me and for you asking me to be here today. It's certainly been a remarkable and wonderful trip. And I'll remember this one for a while. My name is Robert Scott, and I served as the State Commissioner of Education a couple of times, actually, once in 2003 and 4 as interim, and then Chief Deputy up until 2007, and then all the way up until 2012. And I had been at the agency 18 years since my children were 1 and 3 months old. So on my birthday this year, my birthday gift to myself, I went and saw the governor and asked for my parole. So and he was gracious enough to allow me that, and I was looking at the college bills for my children and decided a government paycheck was insufficient to cover those costs. So I've enjoyed life on parole and on the outside now since July. But I have been involved in education policy for well over 20 years and been involved in many education reform efforts and curriculum revisions in Texas and nationally. And my experience with the Common Core actually started when I was asked to sign on to them before they were written. And so I was told I needed to sign a letter agreeing to the Common Core, and I asked if I might read them first, which is, I think, appropriate. And I was told they hadn't been written, but I still wanted my signature on the letter. And I said, that's absurd. First of all, I don't have the legal authority to do that because our law requires our elected State Board of Education to adopt curriculum standards with the direct input of Texas teachers, parents, and business. So adopting something that was written behind closed doors in another state would not meet my federal or my state law. But publicly I said, hey, let me take a wait-and-see approach. And I told the proponents of Common Core when they wrote their standards, I'd be happy to take a look at them. And if something remarkable was in there that I found that we did not have in ours, that I would work with our board and try to incorporate it into our state curriculum standards, which I thought was, a common sense and fair thing to do. And then I was told, oh, no, a state that adopts Common Core must adopt in its totality the Common Core and can only add 15%. It was then that I realized that this initiative, which had been constantly portrayed as state-led and voluntary, was really about control. It was about control, and it got co-opted by the U.S. Department of Education later. And it was about control from some education reform groups who candidly admit their real goal here is to create a national marketplace for education products and services. So, and even more troubling to me was that the lack of transparency. So, these standards were written behind closed doors, not subject to open records, not subject to open meetings. We didn't know who the writers were until the product was complete, and we don't know in the future who is going to rewrite these standards or when. And proponents of that say, yeah, we know the process was deeply flawed, and we're sorry about that, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater because it really is a good system. And to use a legal analogy as an attorney, that it's the fruit of the poisonous tree. Once the tree is poisoned, the fruit that comes from it is also poison in many people's minds, and I think we had to take a serious look at that when we said no. So education policy, as you know, has mainly been left to the states. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 was the first real foray in major federal involvement for economically disadvantaged students. And after that, several iterations of that bill have been passed, as well as the creation of the U.S. Department of Education. 3 major laws still on the books today at the federal level. the act that created the department, the General Education Provisions Act, and No Child Left Behind all explicitly prohibit the United States Department of Education from becoming involved in state and local curriculum decisions. Those three laws are still in the books today. So in an effort to sidestep those laws, it appears the department just started paying people to do things that it was prohibited to do. So what they did was, while there's another federal law that says that you cannot create a national test, what they did was say, we're not going to create a national test, we're going to provide a grant to create 2 national tests. And there are two consortia that were created by a grant under the stimulus bill, and you guys belong to one of them, and there's another one out there as well. And so rather than the department saying we're creating a national test, they said no, these consortia are creating this national test. So, and additionally after that, when we said no, the department, my understanding, had a meeting, and they said, how do we get Texas in? And they said, we'll create this program called Race to the Top, and we'll tie the funding to adoption of these Common Core college readiness standards. There's no way in the world Texas could say no to that. So I looked at the grant application, and I looked at the amount of money. It was $700 million for the state of Texas. And I met with Governor Perry, and I said, it's a lot of money, $700 million. I said, but you have to divide it by 4 years, because it's a 4-year grant. And I said, and our budget in the state of Texas is $50 billion a year. We have 5 million children. So $700 million is enough to run our schools for 2 days. So we would get 2 days worth of funding over 4 years, and the federal government would purportedly get control over our curriculum standards, our teacher evaluation system, a new data system they were asking us to develop in perpetuity. Governor Perry and I looked at that and said, it's probably not a wise investment for us. And we were respectful and said, no thanks, it's voluntary and state-led, we chose not to do it. So after we said that, the department said, okay, fine. You states that are not reformers in our mind, we'll go to Congress and we'll get money for a district competition, and we'll go around you to your school districts and get them to adopt our reforms in exchange for these grants. So that subsequently they had the Race to the Top district competition. They had, out of 1,036 school districts in Texas, plus another 400 plus charters, I think they had 68 applicants, and ultimately they funded 2 charter schools. So I think many of the districts in the state of Texas saw the same issues that I saw, and that is federal oversight over teacher evaluations, over curriculum decisions, over data in exchange for what in the long term is not a substantial amount of money in a district the size of Texas. I do know that the department then said, if you want a waiver from No Child Left Behind, you have to do this. And we said respectfully, no, we're not going to do that. Other states have applied for and received the waivers. One state in particular, California, tried to apply for a general waiver, saying we don't want to do these reforms, but yes, we'd like relief from No Child Left Behind. The department just recently denied that waiver request. So it's very clear to me the department is hinging a lot of its decisions, both financially and in terms of waivers, on adoption of a curriculum matrix and framework that they really have no legal authority to be involved in. The proponents of the Common Core talk about the need for common standards among the states to make valid comparisons, and I would simply say there are other ways to do that. We have the National Assessment of Education Progress, the NAEP, that is the country's blue ribbon report card that we can continue, because I absolutely want to be able to compare kids in Texas to how they're performing in Massachusetts and Georgia and Oklahoma and Pennsylvania. So I don't doubt that goal, don't doubt it one bit, but I think there are other ways to do it. There's also the possibility of creating a national test item bank where we could voluntarily share test items and reduce the cost and reduce the intrusion of the federal government into the system. When I looked at this from the state of Texas, if I had simply scrapped everything that we had done over the last 4 years in developing our college and career readiness standards and gone to the Common Core, I would have had to send my legislature a bill for $2.5 to $3 billion. So I would have gotten $700 million, and I'd have had to send them a bill for $2.5 to $3 billion. I can't even imagine coming to you all as a legislature and saying, I got $700 million for my agency, and I get to spend it in a way that I see fit according to the oversight of the Department of Education, but in return I get to send you a fiscal note for $2.5 to $3 billion. I know my legislature back home probably wouldn't have appreciated it too much. So it didn't seem like the thing to do. The loss of control over curriculum is troubling to me, but let me talk to you as a practical aspect of administering a system the size of Texas. When I set our testing calendar every year, I have to be respectful of what was going on in local communities. Multiple spring breaks, Easter, Texas Public School Week, when we celebrate our public schools. And people in New York City and DC laugh at me when I say this, but Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, San Antonio Livestock Show and Rodeo, community fairs, county fairs. I had to be cognizant of what was going on in communities because I didn't want to upset local traditions. I don't know how a federal test can recognize all of those local communities' celebrations and traditions in 46 states. And I don't think that they are trying to be sinister in their attempt. I just don't know how they possibly can do it and accommodate all of those local community traditions. Further eroding local control is the oversight over teacher evaluations. And this is very important because I have been a proponent of using standardized testing for portions of teacher evaluations, but I also know the limitations of this. And I'll give you an example. I overruled, as the judge, the termination of a teacher that was purportedly based on student performance on one of these evaluation systems because as I read the record, I concluded that the student discipline on the campus was so poorly enforced, no teacher could have been effective in that environment. And so I think you have to look at a lot of things. The way the students come to school, their background, the ability of the teacher to manage and the efforts on the campus to maintain discipline. All of those things go into factors that should be considered in a proper evaluation system because there are also studies that show you can look at a very highly effective and high growth teacher and one that showed negative growth. And if you switch their classrooms, the one that was negative becomes positive and the one that's positive becomes negative. So I think you've got to be careful and look at the whole mix of things when you do this evaluation system. And I worry that the dialogue that should be happening at the local level between teachers and principals and parents about these evaluation systems is being lost in the demands of the department in terms of its timetable and its expectations. And I know states are being threatened for loss of their race to top money if they don't meet specific criteria and specific deadlines. So I think you lose a lot of discussions that need to happen with respect to these high-stakes decisions regarding teacher evaluations. And I'll be brief, I know we've got a time constraint, but I'll close by saying, I think that this national emphasis on curriculum standards is based on the idea that uniformity leads to better student performance. But I would point out to you, and this is extremely important, these curriculum standards have never been piloted anywhere. We don't know that they lead to greater student performance. And traditionally, when I'm going to do something that impacts 5 million students, I first want to pilot it and look and see what it does in 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 campuses or districts. That was not done here. Now I want to leave you with a quote, and it's one of my favorites that I use to describe what I see happening here. Not in this particular branch of government, but it still holds true. If Congress can apply money indefinitely to the general welfare, and are the sole and supreme judges of the general welfare, they may take the care of religion into their own hands. They may establish teachers in every state, county, and parish, and pay them out of the public treasury. They may take into their own hands the education of children, establishing in like manner schools throughout the Union. They may undertake the regulation of roads, other than post roads. In short, everything from the highest object of state legislation down to the most minute object of police would be thrown under the power of Congress. Now in this case we're talking about the executive branch, but that quote was originally spoken by James Madison on the floor of the United States House of Representatives in 1792. The framers of our Union saw this coming, and they intended deliberate dialogue before one branch of government acted on its own. And they intended the checks and balances to prevent one branch from dominating. And I see that happening here, and I just leave you with that sentiment to think about as we move forward. And again, thank you for your time, and I have time to answer some questions before I sprint to the airport.
I would like to ask